Hi, I'm Kiana Fletcher, and this week we're talking about religion and sexuality, and we read the first two chapters of the Straight to Jesus book. So I'm just gonna go into those. So it covered a lot of material, like they're relatively decently lengthed chapters, so I'll just try my best. Chapter 1 of the Straight to Jesus, it went into detail of how the movement and New Hope came to be what they are. It seems like a time where many things are being explored and various movements for social change were taking place. The ex-gay movement was also gaining popularity. And I guess if one side is fighting for like free love, then there is always going to be an opposing side, and that seems to be what kind of pulled the ex-gay movement forward. The movement gained some traction with various books, and this brought in some publicity to Philpott and Frank's counseling and ideas about homosexuality, such as that there isn't a third sex and that homosexuality is a choice. The book seemed to propel the counseling forward more and added more ideas to Frank and Philpott's ways for a person to overcome homosexuality. People, more specifically men, could overcome their tendencies if they had counseling and formed a relationship with God. People could fake it through counseling, but this change wouldn't be as lasting if they hadn't truthfully formed a relationship with God, and eventually they would go back to homosexuality. It was interesting to me that Frank was married to a woman, because it mentions in the first chapter that many of the people in the LIA groups may not have been acting on their homosexuality, but many of them then didn't really become heterosexual, which was the long-term goal. There was a brief time where there was some focus on women, but this didn't last as long in that specific group, and the focus transitioned back to being more male-oriented. Frank found other organizations with similar goals, and in some of the cases joined forces to further help individuals perceived as struggling with homosexuality. The first chapter also talks about when Frank felt strongly that he should move to the Philippines in order to have an ex-gay organization over there. While he was there, he gave the task of running the Love and Action group in the States over to John Smid, who relocated the program to Memphis, Tennessee, which caused a lot of problems for Frank, financial problems, and he eventually restarted a program in California and renamed it Ministry of Hope. So the second chapter starts more into the bulk of the story and starts to follow the men that started the program. I thought it was interesting that they started the program on New Year's Eve, and this helped the significance of like starting on a new year, and otherwise the men would have been partying in their past lives, and by starting on this specific day it just seemed significant. There was a lot of different backgrounds, with some of the men in the program had lived out their homosexuality and like had previously like been in relationships with men and then sought to change. And then there was also some men that hadn't acted out their feelings but were also trying to change how they viewed their own sexuality. And the thing in common that many of them had is that they experienced shame and a lot of guilt throughout their lives surrounding their sexuality. The combination with Open Door Church seems like a pretty different approach, and almost seems like a more positive environment for people as far as these types of organizations go. It was one of the first times that there wasn't complete denial of the men and what they were experiencing, as well as less shame involved in the teachings towards them, and it seems like there's a lot more hope in how they were taught. Even though the entire church is technically against homosexuality, their approach to eradicating the tendencies from the individuals was less hostile than many of the men were used to, and it was described in the book as an unlikely haven for their experience. The different speculations and interpretations of the Bible I thought was an interesting aspect to this chapter, and how some Christian denominations take the text in the Bible as more literal, and others views it as more varied in its interpretations. This really seemed to affect specifically the views on homosexuality, because there have been various changes and interpretations made that more likely reflect the political agenda of those interpreting it rather than what it may have been intended to say originally. The views on homosexuality seem to come mainly from interpretation of the Bible rather than from the exact scripture, and I think this can add more confusion to those that feel shame surrounding their sexuality. The man Lars in the chapter, who was more willing to expose some of the hypocrisy happening in the Christian community towards homosexuality, made an interesting comparison with other behaviors in individuals that are considered sin by many Christians. and how homosexual people are treated. He talked about if someone is like a drug addict, they are still accepted in the community and seem to like people help them through their struggles, but if someone is known to be homosexual, then they're usually avoided or shamed, or their care isn't as welcoming. And he says the church claims to accept people, but that they have a long way to go when it comes to accepting people who are gay. So there was a lot more of the stories about the individual men, and it will be interesting to see how the rest of the book goes with their experiences and following that. And yeah, thanks.